You're listening to the David F. Haas podcast. In this podcast, I'm solo, but we're talking about the meaning of life and how to connect to higher states of consciousness, what is required to move up the scale of consciousness. This is a great conversation, and I think that you're going to get a lot from it. If you have any questions or comments or more ideas about what you would like to hear about on this podcast, just leave a comment below. I think you're really going to enjoy this. So, how to uncover the meaning of life and connect to the ultimate state of consciousness and enlightenment. Hope you enjoy the show. What's the meaning of life? This is what we're going to explore in this podcast. Essentially, I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast the other day, and he had this guy, Thomas Campbell, on. And Thomas Campbell has been doing all kinds of work with like leaving the body and connecting to the quantum field and being able to tap into the infinite intelligence. They call it Akashic records or whatever. And he just kind of like lays it all out, and like, you know, Joe Rogan's mind's kind of being blown as he's talking about all these concepts. But it's like, this is stuff I've been doing for, the last 20 years. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, this would be like a really good topic to like get into, because I think it's like in today's world, it's like really easy to like get discouraged by life, if that makes sense. Like, you can kind of see how like sometimes like life gets into like this routine and this rhythm of like, go to work, wake up, go to work, come home, make dinner, watch Netflix, go to sleep, repeat, and you kind of get into like this robotic kind of system of life, and it feels like you're just working for the weekends, and you start to ask like, is this what it's really all about? Is this what life is meant to be, like, just to work so that you can have some time to enjoy life? And there's all kinds of like little clips on the the internet, on Instagram, TikTok, whatever, where you see how like this is how we were kind of designed by the powers that be to become like these little worker bees, and we've stepped out of like really, really, truly enjoying life. And so now, does this mean that we have to like sell everything and move to a farm? And no, not at all. Connecting to the meaning of life is what Thomas Campbell kind of lays out in his podcast, and he says it like really quickly. And I wanted to make a clip about it, but I couldn't figure out how to edit it on TikTok. So, but what he says in like a very quick little 10-second little clip, he says consciousness essentially has one function, is to lower entropy. And it's like, what the fuck does that mean? Right? And so I like Googled what entropy means, but it's essentially it's, as I kind of like dug into it, it's like the noise of the mind, right? And so if the mind is super noisy, we aren't connected to the present moment. And so the ego, and we'll get into like the ego and all of this, the ego is kind of like running the show. And so when the ego is running the show, this is when we're unconscious, we're not aware. But as we become aware of the ego, right, we move more and more into the present moment, and we move more and more into higher states of consciousness. And this is why Dr. David Hawkins laid out the scale of consciousness, what I think is probably the most important thing that has been given to humanity, which is like a roadmap to move to higher states of consciousness. What happens when you move to higher states of consciousness? Your life just gets like a million times better. Like, I was trapped at the scale of consciousness. The scale of consciousness is a logarithmic scale from 0 to 1,000. I was trapped for the better part of my life at level 50, right? Which is apathy, which is the victim of the world. I was the victim. Nothing would ever go my way. This is just my luck. Bad thing after bad thing was around at any corner. There was like, at any moment, if any single thing was dropped onto my plate, it would be like the end of the world, right? And so when I climbed out of apathy and I moved up to courage, which is the critical level of consciousness where we move from force to flow, my life wasn't just a 180. It was like I couldn't even recognize who I was anymore, and everything began to unfold for me. Like life just became easy and effortless and joyful, and I was full of gratitude, and I was excited to be alive. I was excited to be like, having the opportunity to experience and to transcend. And even the bad, even when the bad shows up, it's like, yeah, sure, I get wrapped up in anger or whatever, but then I'm also like grateful for it, because I'm like, thank you for showing me what I'm still holding on to, because what I'm still holding on to is that entropy that Thomas Campbell is talking about. It is the connection to me identifying as smaller self, which is ego. And if I become aware of that, and that's the thing, most of us are unaware of what the ego is telling us and how it's protected us. Once I become aware of that, I then have the power to begin transcending it. And so as you transcend the ego, what will happen is eventually you'll move to level of consciousness 600, which is like love. And this is not like romantic love. This is like the love you have for your kids, the love you have for your pets. It's unconditional love. It's the love that you have when you're at a wedding, and even if you don't know the person very well, you still are crying because it's like just so joyful, right? That these two people are uniting in love. That is the love that we're talking about. And now there's a reason you cry when you get to those high states of consciousness, because it's like the level of consciousness, the energy of that field is so intense that you can't even open your mouth. You'll just cry, right? And so I've done retreat after retreat out there at Lungo Vita, my spot. And if I get that entire group to connect to the field of love for 20 seconds, that will be more healing than anything that we did, that we talked about, that we rationalized, that we thought through. That 20 seconds will be more powerful than the entire 8-hour retreat that I do, right? And so this is what life's all about. It's about uncovering how the ego has created protections, learning what we're being protected from, having the courage to face that pain. And in doing so, when we're then okay in the pain, right, there's less noise of the mind. We've lowered our entropy. Now we can much easier quiet the mind, and we can connect to these higher states of consciousness. And as you begin to connect to these higher states of consciousness, like miracles happen. Like this is how you stay in like the crest of the wave of creativity. Like this is how I ran Treehouse Bar and Grill, and even though it's a bar, this is how I was able to stay 10 years ahead of the competition at all times, right? Other bar owners would come in and say, like, I just don't understand what you're doing over here. The whole entire economy would be shit and we would be lined up, right? And so it's like, how was I able to do that? Well, it's because I had lowered my entropy. I had lowered the noise of the mind so that I could plug in to the infinite. And so when you plug into the infinite, what you do, it's like, let me give you an example. It's like, if I hold up this circle and I say, this is a circle of what you know. So every time that you have a problem, the only way that you can solve that is to go inside that circle. And now you might be able to read a book, take a course, do whatever, and your circle might get a little bit bigger. But if this circle, now it's a little bit bigger, represents everything that you know, then everything you have yet to know could be represented by this entire room. All right. And so 99% of the world is solving from this circle. Okay. And so if you want to get plugged into the crest of the wave of creativity, you want to be 10 years ahead of your competition. If you want to get the answers to anything that's going on in your life, why you can't find love, anything, you have to get outside of that circle, right? Einstein even said this. He's like, a problem cannot be solved from the same level of consciousness as created. We have to learn how to get outside of the circle. Well, how do you do that? Well, first is you become aware of how the mind is protecting you. Let me rephrase that. You become aware of what the mind is saying to you every single day, right? And if you understand that the mind or the ego has one function, which is protection, it's a lot easier to notice what the mind is saying, okay? So if you just are able to start listening to what the mind is saying, like I literally, let me walk you through how powerful this is. I've talked multiple times about like my addiction to like Coke Zero, and I went from like alcohol to regular pop to Coke Zero, and it's like I've talked over and over about this, and there's probably other addictions in there, working hard, sex, whatever, it's all in there, okay? And so as I've kind of eliminated through all these, the last one that was kind of like sticky was this pop thing. And what I came to realize is like what the mind was telling me all the time about pop, right? And so the mind could see that if I were to drink a pop, I wouldn't have to face certain pain, right? if I were to, and this is the three main places that have recently come to me, which has allowed me to step out of this addiction completely. The first one was, anytime the money button is pushed in me, if my money gets messed with, right? It's like, I had some bankers lined up that were going to give us a mortgage out at Lingo Vita. And I was like, oh, I'm feeling really good about this. And then literally the day after I quit drinking pop, they called me and said they want another year of financials. And I'm like, you motherfuckers, that was the money button. But because I was aware this time, I was like, okay, I'm sensing the urge to want to escape back and just go drink a pop, which I know it sounds silly, but like this is what was my thing. And you can apply that to anything in your life. You can apply that to fighting with your wife, fighting with your partner, overeating, whatever it is, whatever behavior, overthinking, anxiety, you can apply it to anything. Okay. Mine just happens to be escaping through drinking pop. Right. And so now that I was aware though, that the money button was one of my triggers, and every time that button gets pushed, my mind goes into hyperdrive to try and get me out of it. And one of the ways it's determined the best to get me out of that is to go and drink a pop. Okay. And so now that I'm aware, I become aware of the behavior, I become aware of the urge, and I say, well, what is it I'm trying to avoid? Well, I'm trying to avoid the fear of not having enough. But because I've done a lot of work on the fear of having enough, I just turn towards that pain, and guess what? The urge, the desire, whatever, to drink a pop goes away. The second button was like my wife. It's like anytime my wife, and not my wife and I barely ever fight, but it's even her mood. If she's in a bad mood, right, that would also push a button in me of, let's just say she doesn't love me, for lack of a better term. Okay. And so when that button got pushed in me, I wanted to get out of that button. I want to get out of that trigger, and I would want to go drink a pop. Right. And then the third one was tiredness. If I felt tired, which then led to me not being productive, I wanted to drink a pop to get out of that, right? And so now I became aware of the noise of the mind with those three things. And over time, over multiple times of quitting, I was able to observe and watch how the mind tried to convince me otherwise, that I should just go back and drink pop or do whatever. And now I'm able to observe all that, and I've taken back power. So now my mind, before I quit drinking pop, this is literally, there's a movie out there that just got released with Mila Kunis, where she's like an addict, and she has this like great line in the movie where she says, "Don't you think that every single night before I go to bed, I tell myself I'm going to quit, and by morning or whatever, I'm thinking about where I'm going to get my next fix." Essentially, it's like whatever it is, right? And so that's what was going on with me, but with pop, right? That's what was happening with me with pop. Was like every night I would be like, I got to stop drinking pop tomorrow. And then every morning it would be like, oh, I would drink a pop. And then I would feel down and, feel bad about myself and whatever. And I would go through this cycle. My mind was insanely occupied with trying to resolve this problem, right? And so now when I broke free from this, the mind is quieter, right? And over the last 2 weeks that I haven't drank pop, I've been more connected. I've been more energized. I've been plugging into creativity. I've made major adjustments in my business and the way things flow. It's like everything has just become easier, right? And it's from quieting the noise of the mind, so I'm plugging into what is actually possible. And this is essentially the meaning of life. The meaning of life is the undoing of the ego. The undoing of all of the protections that the mind has created to protect you from feeling emotional pain, so that we are then clear, so we can connect to who we truly are. So let's go into that just a little bit. And I know I've talked extensively about this on the podcast, but it's like we learn through repetition, right? So the more you hear it, the more it sticks. So you might have heard it when you listen to podcast 1 here, and now you're on podcast 154, and it's like, this is the time it actually clicks, right? And so when you are able to observe the mind, right? When you can just step back and say, let me just listen to what the mind is telling me, right? The more you get good at stepping back from the mind and just observing, you're just listening to what your thoughts are saying. You're not trying to change them or anything. You're just listening, right? The ability to observe is who you really are, right? And then, in fact, we are actually something greater than that. We are like essentially one with God. And so I was trying to come up with a good like analogy. And so think of it like this. It's like, you, the ego, the body and the mind, is the guy on the boat, on the rowboat in the middle of the ocean. Who you are really is like a molecule of water. Take a step back from that, but you are also one with the ocean, if that makes sense. Okay. And so what we want to do is we want to identify more as the molecule of water that is one with the infinite. So it's like, if you think of that molecule, it's like connected to everything that's happening in the ocean, right? If you think of the ego, it's just the guy floating on the surface that has no clue what's actually going on, right? And so when we take that step back, in the first step back, we still have a sense of identity. We are still a consciousness that is observing the ego or the body and the mind, all right? But if you take a step back even further, you connect to allness, right? And that's when you become nobody and no one. You are just one with all right? And so understanding that we are part of this greater intelligence, this greater force, is what life is all about. It's about a returning to first our consciousness, our higher self, and then a returning to all, right? And so now a lot of people will, like, as I kind of talk about this, and because even what I'm picking up for myself, it's like, oh, that kind of sounds like then I wouldn't be me anymore, right? But I guess what I want to say is, who you think you are right now, the me that you've just said I wouldn't be me anymore, is not who you really are, right? And the more you begin to realize that who you are today, this person, body and mind, that you think is you, is actually just a collection of programs, belief systems, and protections. And as you knock down all of those programs, belief systems, and protections that have protected you from emotional pain, what will happen is all of those walls, all of the noise will fall to the side, and then you will allow in what life is really all about, which is that energy of love, right? It'll just start come flowing into you. And when you become that state, you not only is it like just an amazing place to be, but you'll be like from a place of attraction. So everything that you do will just get all kinds of like rave reviews, essentially. Like Lungo Vita as an example of a spot that was created from a complete state of attraction and a complete state of connecting to the infinite, right? Lungo Vita will always remain 10 years ahead, or even longer, even further ahead of what everyone else is doing, right? And it's because we're constantly trying to step out of what we think is best and tapping into what is the best for all, right? And when you do that, what's in the highest good for all is also in the highest good for you. And so when you do that, you get supported by that energy, right? Last week I did a whole video on intention that I'm about to release. And I talk about the power of intention and how the universe responds to intention, right? And so when you get connected and plugged in and you get that universal support, everything that you need is going to come flowing into your life. And then this is when people are going to start asking you, like, how is your life just so good? Like, how is everything just flowing to your life? Everything seems easy and effortless. And you're stepping out of, you're kind of isolating yourselves in some ways because you're stepping out of like the grind and hustle culture, and you're just allowing everything to flow into your life. And people are going to be like, how is that? And then the other thing that's probably the most amazing thing is that you don't need to quit your job, leave your city, make more money. You don't need to do any of that to feel that sense of love, that sense of gratefulness to be alive. You don't need to do any of that. It's with you at all times, right? And now because of this, because you have this sense, it's like that's where you're attracting from, right? And so what you hold in mind tends to manifest, right? And so if you're constantly holding in mind that nothing ever goes your way, guess what? That's exactly what's going to happen in your life, right? But if you're constantly holding in mind that everything will unfold and everything will be fine and everything that I need will flow into my life, then guess what? That's exactly what will happen, right? And so this is what the meaning of life is. It's about undoing the mechanism of the ego, connecting more to higher self so that we can then ascend the scale of consciousness. And the interesting thing about this whole thing is, like, we all have like a comfy coat. And this is my mentor, Andrew, used to tell me about this. It's like this coat, right? And so I made some notes here. I wanted to make sure I always just talk and never follow my guidelines. But what he talks about is this comfy coat, which is like our favorite collapse. So for example, my comfy coat was the coat of apathy. So every time things went wrong, when my life started falling apart, I would put on the coat of victim. Poor me, nothing ever goes my way, this is just my luck. And that's where I was comfortable. Once I became aware that I was wearing the coat of apathy, I could just take that coat off. And now that coat was hanging in my closet. Every time I noticed things going wrong and wanting to go put that coat back on, I would just say, no, I'm not going to put that coat back on, right? I also did the work to heal from the pain that coat was protecting me from. So then I take the coat of apathy off, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm wearing the coat of desire, right? It was level of consciousness 125. So then I had to start doing the work to take the coat of desire off. And now where it gets actually really challenging is when you get to the level of consciousness 200, where your life just gets like really, really good. Like it's just like, you're just in a state of flow. Like everything is just kind of unfolding for you. That's when it's harder to start seeing the coats, right? But God, the universe, whatever you want to call it, will continue to show it to you, right? Will continue to show you like, hey, look, like that's still in you, right? Here's an opportunity to feel what you've been avoiding by me presenting this trigger to you, right? And so then you could say, oh my God, I'm wearing the, what would be a coat of like that higher state of consciousness. I'm wearing the coat of pride, right? I talked about this on a couple podcasts ago about Canadian pride, and pride level of consciousness 175. While it is higher than most levels of consciousness, right? It is still vulnerable because, for example, Canada's experiencing right now. Canada's pride is vulnerable because our country has become so weak because of the leaders that we've had that we're under economic attack from President Trump, right? And our Canadian pride could be pulled out right from underneath us if we became a part of the US, right? And so pride goeth before the fall. So it's like, as you begin to become aware of what these coats are, and as you move up the scale of consciousness, as you get higher in the scale of consciousness, it gets harder and harder to see what coats you're still wearing because life is actually just so good. Here's a coat that you might wear would be the coat of intellect, right? I work with a lot of high achieving men and women, and a lot of them are super smart, but that is a coat of protection as well, right? The intellect actually will block you from connecting to the infinite because the intellect just wants to figure everything out. So then you have to take off the coat of intellect. Now see how that coat becomes like a lot more difficult of a coat to take off because you get a lot out of being intellectual, right? You get respect and you make more money and you figure things out. People come to you, they rely on you, whatever it may be, right? You can maybe build $1 billion business because of your intellect. But if you want to go to really advanced states of consciousness like love and enlightenment, you're going to have to let go of the coat of intellect, right? And so this is where things become a little bit more challenging. But essentially, let me just give it to you this way. Most people, about 80% of the population, is still below the level of consciousness of 200, all right, which is courage. And so if you are able to begin, and we fluctuate, like you're not just always in one spot, but like if you begin to take a step back from the ego and you begin to notice the way the ego is talking to you, if it's constantly angry, if it's constantly thinking about the future and what needs to happen, if it's constantly in fear, you are going to be able to resonate with, I'm at level of consciousness fear. And so now with that awareness, every thought around fear, you're going to be able to notice. When you notice it, you can say, well, what is it that I'm avoiding by projecting to this fearful situation where I don't have enough? I'm trying to avoid the pain of not having enough. Well, where did you experience that in your life for the first time? Oh, when I was a kid and, people made fun of you because of the car you drove or whatever it was, right? And so now you have the knowledge and the awareness, and then you have the courage to feel that pain. Then the mechanism of the mind of protection, which is the overthinking or the projecting to negative outcomes to try and prepare you for that pain, it goes away. And now you're like, oh, wow. And now you move up the scale of consciousness. When you do that, your life just dramatically improves, right? And so the goal of all of this is to keep knocking off all of the ego's protections until we finally reconnect with our higher self, which is connected to all. We finally connect to the water molecule, which is connected to the ocean. We can then look up from that connectedness at the ego and the body and the mind, right? And we can look up at it and just observe it, right? And when we're in that state, it's like we are unlimited. Anything is possible. We are connected with the energy of God, the energy of the universe. And that's when if you want to get in deeper, you can make a decision to like either stay in this body or leave, right? But for now, I'm in a place where I feel like I still got a lot to do, so I'm staying, right? And so, but there will come a time where I'll let go of even the need to help others, because even in that there's a sense of like ego in there, meaning thinking that I'm the person that needs to help other people. I might have to let go of that one day to finally move into enlightenment, right? And so I hope I articulated that well. Thomas Campbell, go listen to that podcast where he talks about lowering entropy. That's the one thing he says I think is really great, but he says a bunch of great stuff. And begin observing what you're telling yourself on a daily basis. Even if you only do it for 2 minutes a day, you'll be ahead of 95% of the population. The more you get better at observing the mind, the more you begin to take back your power, the more you can face the things you've been avoiding. Once you face those things, the ego's protections go away, and then you create more clarity. This is essentially the process. And it's all about that love. That's who we really are, is love. And we want to try and return to that state. And if you do that, it's like, people could just be in your presence and they might heal from whatever it is that they're going through. And that's where we're all headed. And you only have to experience it once to understand that, oh, that's the goal, right? And so once you kind of see it, you're like, oh, geez, yeah, I want to stay there way more often, right? And so that's where I'll leave it. If you got any value at all from this podcast, just don't forget to hit that like, subscribe button. Like it so you see more stuff like this. Subscribe because it helps move my stuff up the algorithm, and we can get this message out to more people, which I'll probably have to let go of at some point as well. Thanks for taking the time to listen. We'll see you again next Sunday.